The lake had always been a quiet, peaceful place. Every morning, sunlight would hit the water and make it shine like glass. The sound of birds singing and fish jumping created a calm rhythm that the people living nearby cherished. Most mornings, the homeowner would walk down to the lake, carrying a cup of coffee, and just stand there, enjoying the view. It was a place where worries seemed to fade, and life felt simple and happy. He had lived there for years and had seen the seasons change, the leaves fall and grow back, and the water reflect all those little moments that made life beautiful. He liked to fish sometimes, just for the fun of it, or row his small boat to the middle of the lake and watch the sky. It was his little escape from the world. The neighborhood itself was friendly. People would wave when they walked past. Kids would play near the water. Neighbors sometimes shared stories about their days. But even in the calmest places, there can be someone who wants more control than is fair. Someone who believes rules are only theirs to enforce. And in this neighborhood, that person was the HOA Karen. She had been on the Homeowners Association for years and had slowly started gaining influence. At first, she seemed like she cared about the community, checking that lawns were mowed and houses looked neat. But over time, her sense of care began to feel more like obsession. She would watch people, judge their actions, and quickly call meetings if something did not go her way. People started whispering about her, saying she was too strict, too controlling, and often mean. The homeowner noticed her too, but at first it didn't bother him. He was a quiet man, liked his routines, and tried to stay out of conflicts. He mowed his lawn, kept his property clean, and followed all the community rules. But HOA Karen had a sharp eye for things she considered wrong. And sometimes she even invented problems to push her own agenda. One morning, he received a notice in his mailbox. It was a small paper, neatly typed, with the HOA logo at the top. The notice said he had violated a rule about the way he decorated his lawn. It seemed silly, almost childish. But the tone of the notice made it clear it was not a joke. He frowned and put it aside, thinking maybe he would ignore it. But he knew ignoring her usually made things worse. As days passed, the notices kept coming. Small things, like leaving his boat on the lake dock a few minutes too long. Planting flowers that didn't match the HOA's idea of a perfect garden became reasons for warnings. The homeowner tried to explain, to calmly talk with HOA Karen during meetings, but she would not listen. Her voice was sharp, her words cutting, and she had a way of making people feel guilty even when they had done nothing wrong. Neighbors noticed it too. They whispered to each other in the grocery store, saying that she had a grudge against someone and that her power was growing. But most people were afraid to speak up. No one wanted to be her next target. Despite the tension, life near the lake continued. The water remained clear, the fish still swam, and the mornings were still filled with sunlight. The homeowner tried to focus on these small joys. He would spend time with his dog near the water, tossing a stick for him to fetch, or just sit on the dock, feeling the wind on his face. Children from nearby houses sometimes ran past, laughing, and it reminded him why he loved this place. Nature didn't care about HOA rules, and for a while, that made him feel safe, but HOA Karen's presence was like a storm cloud on the horizon. She started attending every little gathering near the lake, criticizing the way people parked their cars or the type of chairs they brought. If someone left trash behind, she would call them out loudly, making a scene. Even small things became battles. The homeowner tried to avoid her, staying quiet and keeping to himself, but she seemed to take a special interest in him. Maybe it was because he didn't bow to her authority. Maybe it was because he refused to let her control his life completely. Whatever the reason, her attention was not something he wanted. The tension grew quietly at first, like the slow ripples of water before a storm. It was subtle, almost invisible to outsiders, but it weighed heavily on him. Simple pleasures like walking by the lake or letting the dog swim began to feel stressful because there was always the fear of being watched or reported. The notices became more frequent and the meetings more intense. HOA Karen would sit at the head of the table, papers in hand, her eyes scanning everyone, and her voice sharp like a whip. She would point out mistakes that no one else had noticed and make people feel as though they had done something unforgivable. And when she looked at him, it felt personal, like he had done something terrible, even though all he wanted was peace. The neighbors started talking quietly among themselves. Some had experienced her strictness firsthand. Others had just seen it from a distance. They shared stories about how she would manipulate votes in the HOA meetings, how she would exaggerate small problems to make people afraid, and how she seemed to enjoy the feeling of control. The homeowner listened and realized he was not alone, but he also knew that confronting her directly could make things worse. HOA Karen did not back down easily. She thrived on conflict and was relentless when she wanted something. One day, the homeowner noticed a change in the lake itself. It was still beautiful, still peaceful, but he felt a subtle tension in the air. The water seemed colder, or maybe it was just his mind reflecting the unease around him. He sat on the dock longer than usual, watching the fish swim and trying to calm his thoughts. The birds continued to sing, but even their songs sounded a little different, like a reminder that peace could be fragile. He realized that the struggle with HOA Karen was not just about rules or notices. It was about power, control, and the way one person could turn a calm community into a tense battlefield. Despite the stress, he tried to stay grounded. He found solace in his routines and small acts of kindness with neighbors and in the simple beauty of the lake. He started documenting everything, every notice, every meeting, every incident. He knew that if things escalated, he would need evidence to protect himself and his home. Writing it down, keeping track of dates and details, gave him a sense of control in a situation where he felt powerless. Neighbors began to quietly support him in small ways. Some would wave, some would share stories of their own encounters with HOA Karen, and a few even offered advice. It was not much, but it reminded him that there was still community, still people who cared about fairness. These small connections became a shield against the constant pressure of one person's obsession with control. Yet HOA Karen's influence continued to grow. She started suggesting stricter rules at meetings, rules that seemed designed to punish rather than protect. The homeowner listened carefully, noting every word. He realized that this was more than just a personal issue. It was a problem for the entire community. Her obsession with perfection and control was spreading like a shadow, affecting everyone around her. The peaceful mornings at the lake were no longer free of worry. Every action, even small ones like leaving a chair by the dock or planting flowers, could be scrutinized. Despite everything, he refused to give up his love for the lake. He continued his walks, his quiet moments, and his small acts of kindness. He taught himself to focus on what he could control: his own actions, his own home, and his own peace of mind. And he hoped that by staying calm and collected, he could withstand the storm that HOA Karen was brewing. As the weeks went by, tensions in the neighborhood became harder to ignore. Some residents tried to mediate, others tried to stay out of it, but HOA Karen seemed unstoppable. Meetings grew longer, arguments sharper, and the sense of community began to crack. Yet the homeowner remained patient, documenting every interaction and hoping that reason and law would eventually prevail. He knew that in the quiet moments by the lake, he could find clarity, and that clarity would be his guide in the difficult months to come. Little did he know, the conflict was about to take a much darker turn. What began as simple disagreements over rules was about to escalate in ways that would impact not just him, the entire lake and neighborhood he loved so dearly. HOA Karen's desire for control was about to cross a dangerous line, and the peaceful mornings he cherished would soon be threatened by actions he could never have imagined. For now, though, he could only prepare himself, hold on to the simple joys, and hope that common sense would somehow prevail before the situation became irreversible. The tension in the neighborhood had started small, like the first cracks in a frozen lake, almost invisible but dangerous if ignored. The homeowner had been patient, keeping records of every notice and every meeting. He tried to reason with HOA Karen, hoping that the right words, calm explanations, and respectful appeals could help her see sense. But she seemed to enjoy conflict more than compromise. Every time he spoke, her eyes would narrow, her lips pressing into a thin line as if she was plotting her next move. The homeowner knew that she was not just strict or particular, she was personal. She had a target and he was it. One morning, he received another notice in his mailbox. It was more aggressive than the previous ones, filled with strict deadlines and vague accusations. This time, it was about the flowers he had planted along his property line. HOA Karen claimed that the colors clashed with the neighborhood aesthetic and that it was a violation of the community rules. The homeowner could hardly believe it. He had planted the flowers for enjoyment, to bring a little color and life to his yard. Yet here was a formal complaint, as if he had committed a crime. He felt a mix of frustration, disbelief, and sadness. The lake, which had always been a source of calm, now seemed like a reminder of her constant surveillance. He decided to attend the next HOA meeting. The room was filled with residents, some curious, some anxious, and others clearly wary of HOA Karen. When she arrived, the atmosphere shifted. People straightened in their seats, voices grew softer, and her commanding presence dominated the space. She started by addressing general issues but quickly focused on him. She criticized his flowers, the way he maintained his dock, and even the times he had parked near the lake. Every sentence was calculated, precise, meant to intimidate. The homeowner listened quietly, taking notes in his mind and on paper. He could feel the eyes of some neighbors on him, unsure whether to offer support or stay silent. After the meeting, he approached a few neighbors to discuss what had just happened. Many nodded in agreement. Sharing stories of similar experiences with HOA Karen, some had received warnings about trivial things like mailbox colors, garden ornaments, or small repairs. Others spoke of the stress of living under her gaze, the anxiety that came from wondering what might set her off next. The homeowner realized that this was more than personal harassment. It was a pattern of controlling behavior affecting many people. Yet fear held most residents back. HOA Karen had the power to enforce rules, and most people worried about becoming the next target. Despite the growing hostility, the homeowner tried to maintain his routines. He continued his walks by the lake, fed the ducks, and spent quiet mornings in reflection. He found solace in small, tangible actions that were completely within his control. A cup of coffee at sunrise, the dog playing fetch. The gentle ripple of water under his bow tall of these simple moments became his sanctuary. Yet each time he felt a sense of peace, the memory of the notices, the meetings, HOA. Karen's disapproving gaze crept in. It was a constant battle between enjoying life and being on guard. HOA. Karen's influence began extending beyond the meetings. She would approach residents individually, giving unsolicited advice or criticism. She questioned minor repairs, the way people used their property, and even the types of boats or lawn furniture they had. Conversations that once were friendly became tense. People whispered in private about her strictness and her obsession with control, but they avoided confrontation. Those who tried to push back often found themselves facing more notices. Public humiliation at meetings, or social isolation within the community. The homeowner understood this and felt a mix of anger and determination. He did not want to become isolated or intimidated. He wanted fairness. And he would not abandon his love for the lake or his right to enjoy his home. The situation escalated subtly but steadily. HOA Karen began sending letters about the lake itself, claiming that residents were using it improperly. She cited imaginary rules or stretched the wording of existing ones to accuse people of violations. A simple fishing trip could become a formal complaint. A dock used for a few extra minutes drew criticism. The homeowner knew these were attempts to provoke him and others, to establish dominance through fear and confusion. He kept his notes and photographic evidence, recording dates, times, and specific events. Documentation became both a shield and a source of hope. If she continued to escalate, he would be ready to defend himself. One afternoon, the homeowner noticed a small group of residents gathered near the lake, talking quietly and looking concerned. Curious, he approached them. They shared news that HOA Karen had recently increased fines for minor infractions and was considering stricter enforcement of rules that had never been taken seriously before. Some neighbors feared she would introduce policies that could affect everyone, like restricting access to the lake or limiting activities. The homeowner listened carefully, absorbing their concerns. He realized the scope of her influence. It was not just personal anymore. Her obsession with control was spreading, affecting the community as a whole. Even with these pressures, he found moments of connection and strength. A few neighbors quietly expressed support, sharing stories and encouraging him to remain calm and strategic. He began thinking about solutions, not just for himself, but for the community. Perhaps if enough people stood together, if evidence of her behavior was presented clearly, change could occur. He also knew that patience was critical. Confrontation might provoke her further, but careful. Documented steps could protect everyone and restore fairness. Meanwhile, HOA Karen continued to monitor him. Her presence was a constant shadow over his daily life. He felt her eyes when he worked in his garden, when he walked to the dock, even when he launched his boat. Her interference became more personal, crossing into behavior that made neighbors uncomfortable. It was no longer about rules or aesthetics. It was about asserting control and satisfying her desire to dominate. The homeowner had to carefully navigate these interactions, responding politely but firmly, documenting everything, and finding support where he could. Tension reached a boiling point one afternoon during a community meeting. HOA Karen called out several residents, including him, for minor infractions. Her tone was harsh, her words pointed, and her accusations seemed endless. Some neighbors whispered among themselves, others tried to defend themselves, but she dismissed all arguments. It was clear that her goal was not fairness, but intimidation. The homeowner stayed calm, noting every word, every accusation, every interruption. He knew that keeping his composure was critical. Reacting in anger could give her the satisfaction she sought and potentially escalate the conflict. After the meeting, the homeowner returned to the lake, exhausted but determined. He sat on the dock, letting the sun warm his face, listening to the gentle lapping of water. The natural world remained his refuge. He thought about his next steps, consulting with other residents, continuing to document everything, and exploring legal or community channels to address the escalating harassment. The situation was difficult, but he refused to give in to fear. HOA Karen might try to dominate, but he would protect his home, his peace, and his right to enjoy the lake. Days turned into weeks, and the pattern continued. HOA Karen's notices became more frequent, her presence more intrusive. The homeowner found himself planning activities around potential scrutiny, adjusting routines to avoid conflict. Yet he also found resilience in the small joys of life by the lake. He watched the seasons change, listened to the birds, and took comfort in the fact that nature remained beyond anyone's control. These moments reminded him why he fought so hard, why he refused to let a single person dictate the rhythm of his life. In quiet conversations, neighbors shared that they had witnessed similar patterns of harassment. Some described being scared to speak up, fearing fines or social isolation. Others admitted they had tried to resist but found that HOA Karen had ways to manipulate votes, apply pressure, and create divisions. The homeowner realized that collective action might be necessary. Alone, he could resist only so much, but together, the residents could create a force strong enough to challenge her control. This thought brought hope, even amid the stress. Despite the growing challenges, he kept focusing on what he could control. He spent mornings feeding ducks, cleaning the dock, and walking along the lake, grounding himself in simple routines. Even when HOA Karen's interference loomed large, these moments allowed him to stay centered. Each act of care for the lake and the community reminded him that peace was still possible, that joy could exist even in difficult circumstances, and yet he could feel that the conflict was far from over. HOA Karen's obsession with control was escalating in subtle ways. Rumors began circulating about her plans to take even more drastic actions. The homeowner knew that what had started as small conflicts over flowers and docks was turning into a much larger issue. The lake, once a place of calm, was now a battleground for power and control. He realized that preparation, patience, and careful strategy would be essential to protect his home, his neighbors, and the natural beauty of the lake that had always been a source of comfort and peace. As the weeks went by, the homeowner noticed a disturbing change in the lake. At first, it was small and easy to ignore. The water looked slightly different, duller in color, and there were fewer fish jumping near the surface. He thought it might be a seasonal effect or something natural, but he could not shake the feeling that something was wrong. When he spoke with neighbors, some had noticed the same changes. Plants near the edge of the water were wilting, ducks seemed less energetic, and the air had a strange, bitter smell that hadn't been there before. The lake, that had been a source of peace, now felt fragile and threatened. HOA Karen's interference had begun to extend beyond rules and notices. Rumors began spreading that she had hired someone to take care of the lake without informing anyone, claiming that her actions were for the health and safety of the community. At first, neighbors tried to give her the benefit of the doubt, but the changes in the water and the health of animals near the lake were impossible to ignore. The homeowner, always careful and observant, started taking photos and videos. He wanted to have clear evidence in case the situation worsened. One morning, he noticed a small boat near the center of the lake that seemed unfamiliar. It had equipment for spreading chemicals, and he immediately recognized that something illegal might be happening. Fear rose in his chest, but he stayed calm. He knew that confronting someone directly could be dangerous. Instead, he took careful notes, photographs, and recorded the time and date. This documentation would become critical. The peaceful lake that had been his sanctuary was now at the center of a conflict that could affect everyone in the neighborhood. When HOA Karen called another meeting, she presented herself as a responsible and caring member of the community. She claimed that recent changes in the lake's appearance were due to her maintenance program, designed to remove algae and improve water quality. Most residents were uncertain how to respond. Some trusted her, while others were starting to question her actions. The homeowner raised concerns about the unusual color of the water, the dying plants, and the sick animals. But HOA Karen dismissed them with a confident smile. She explained that her methods were professional and that anyone who disagreed simply didn't understand lake management. Her tone left no room for argument, but the homeowner felt that this was far from the truth. Over the next few days, the changes in the lake became more pronounced. Fish floated lifelessly near the surface. Leaves turned brown, and the water carried a sharp chemical smell. The homeowner's heart sank as he realized the damage was real and growing worse. It wasn't just about HOA Karen targeting him anymore. Her actions were affecting the entire ecosystem of the lake, harming wildlife and upsetting neighbors who had once felt safe and calm. The homeowner decided to reach out to the local environmental agency. He gathered all the evidence he had collected: photos, videos, notes, and witness statements from concerned neighbors. He knew that professional intervention was necessary to stop further damage. While waiting for a response, he continued to monitor the lake closely, documenting every change, every new effect on plants, fish, and animals. Each morning, the once serene water seemed a little more troubled. Reflecting the growing tension in the neighborhood, neighbors were beginning to speak openly about the situation. Fear was turning into frustration and anger. People who had stayed silent before now started expressing their concerns in hushed conversations in private meetings. Some were afraid of direct confrontation with HOA Karen, but others were beginning to understand the severity of her actions. The homeowner realized that the situation required careful planning. Emotional reactions could worsen the problem, but strategic action and unity among residents could make a difference. He began organizing small groups to gather evidence and prepare statements, emphasizing the importance of remaining calm, factual, and thorough. Meanwhile, HOA Karen continued her activities around the lake, claiming that she was performing essential work for the community. Her obsession with control seemed to intensify, and she appeared almost pleased by the disruption she was causing. She watched the homeowner and others carefully, as if anticipating any challenge. It became clear that she did not intend to stop or admit fault. Her methods had escalated from minor annoyances and personal attacks to actions that were dangerous and potentially criminal. The homeowner also started noticing physical changes in the surroundings. The once lush and healthy plants near the water's edge began to wilt or turn brown. Ducks and other birds were avoiding the lake, and the occasional raccoon or small animal seemed hesitant to come near. These signs were impossible to ignore. His concern was no longer just about HOA Karen's harassment, but about the tangible harm being done to the environment he had always loved. Every day he documented changes with photographs, written notes, and recordings. He knew that this information could be crucial in holding her accountable. One evening, a group of neighbors approached him, worried and seeking advice. They shared stories of their observations, odd chemical smells, strange activities near the water, and sudden changes in plant and animal behavior. The homeowner listened carefully, calming their fears and reassuring them that their observations would be useful evidence. Together, they developed a plan to monitor the lake more closely. Taking turns observing and documenting activities without confronting HOA Karen directly, they wanted to protect themselves and the community while gathering undeniable proof. Days passed, and the tension mounted. The homeowner observed a boat on the lake one morning with a small device releasing substances into the water. He took photos discreetly, his hands trembling slightly, but his mind focused. This was no longer about harassment or minor disputes. This was deliberate action causing real harm. The homeowner immediately shared the evidence with neighbors in a secure and private way, ensuring they were aware of the seriousness without alerting HOA Karen. Prematurely, the environmental agency finally responded. Inspectors came to the lake, taking water samples, examining plants, and documenting wildlife health. The homeowner guided them, showing the photos, notes, and videos he had collected over weeks. The evidence was overwhelming. Experts confirmed that chemicals had been introduced illegally, harming fish and plants. It was clear that someone with access and authority had acted without permission, and the damage could take months or even years to reverse. HOA Karen, when confronted indirectly through official channels, denied everything. She claimed she was performing authorized maintenance, but the evidence told a different story. Investigators pointed to the documentation, noting the timeline of events and the severity of the ecological damage. The homeowner and neighbors watched as the situation unfolded, realizing that this was a turning point. HOA Karen's obsession with control had gone too far, and her actions were no longer just personal, they were dangerous and illegal. In the following weeks, the homeowner continued to document the recovery of the lake while the authorities investigated. The chemicals had affected a large portion of the water, killing fish and damaging plants. The homeowner and a few dedicated neighbors began organizing cleanup efforts, carefully restoring the lake and helping wildlife recover. Even as they worked, they remained vigilant, knowing that HOA Karen's actions had already shown how destructive her obsession could be. During this time, the homeowner reflected on the experience. He realized that patience, careful observation, and documentation had been critical in protecting himself and the community. He also understood the importance of community unity. Neighbors working together were able to gather evidence and take action without being intimidated. While the lake had suffered, the collective effort gave hope that recovery was possible and that the community could withstand even the actions of someone determined to cause harm by the end of the month. Inspectors had completed their initial report. The homeowner presented his records, photographs, and videos, demonstrating the timeline of events and the observable damage. Authorities acknowledged that HOA Karen's actions had crossed a dangerous line, affecting the entire neighborhood and the lake's ecosystem. Legal procedures were set in motion, and the homeowner knew that the process would take time. Yet, he felt a sense of relief that action was finally being taken. Throughout all of this, the homeowner never lost sight of the lake's beauty. Even with the damage, he found small moments of joy. A fish that survived, a bird returning to the water, the soft ripple of waves in the morning sun. These small signs reminded him why he had fought so hard, why he had documented everything, and why he had refused to let fear or intimidation dominate his life. The lake remained a symbol of resilience, hope, and the importance of standing up for what is right. Despite the ongoing stress and the challenges ahead, the homeowner felt stronger and more determined. HOA Karen's actions had shown the destructive power of obsession and control, but they had also highlighted the importance of patience, documentation, and community solidarity. The lake, once threatened by deliberate harm, was slowly beginning to heal, and the residents, led quietly by the homeowner's careful and thoughtful approach, were learning the importance of vigilance, unity, and the protection of both nature and community values. As the sun set over the lake one evening, casting golden reflections on the water, the homeowner allowed himself a quiet moment of peace. He knew that the battle was not completely over, but he also knew that he had taken the right steps to protect his home, his neighbors, and the natural beauty he loved. The events had been frightening and difficult, but they had also taught him valuable lessons about courage, resilience, and the importance of standing up against injustice. No matter how small it may seem at first, the lake, scarred but surviving, mirrored his own journey through a time of fear, challenge, and determination to restore balance and peace to the community. The weeks following the environmental inspection were tense and filled with anticipation. The homeowner had done everything carefully, documenting the changes, observing the lake, and gathering neighbors' testimonies. Now it was time to see whether all that effort would make a difference. The inspectors had collected samples, checked the water, and spoken to residents. The evidence pointed clearly to illegal and harmful actions affecting the lake's ecosystem, while HOA Karen continued to deny any wrongdoing. The growing pressure was becoming impossible to ignore. The homeowner knew that careful patience was necessary. HOA Karen had a reputation for manipulation and charm, and many in the neighborhood had been fooled by her confidence in the past. He continued meeting privately with concerned neighbors, discussing ways to respond calmly and strategically. They shared updates on any unusual activity around the lake and coordinated their documentation, making sure everything was accurate and complete. The sense of community, once fractured by fear, was beginning to strengthen as residents realized the seriousness of the situation. One morning, as the homeowner walked down to the lake, he noticed subtle but worrying signs. The water, still recovering from the chemical damage, was showing small patches of discoloration. Some fish were struggling, and certain plants were not regrowing as expected. This confirmed that the damage was significant and that immediate intervention was necessary. He recorded everything and immediately shared the information with the inspectors, who promised to follow up quickly. While it was stressful, the homeowner felt reassured that professionals were involved and that the evidence he had collected would not be ignored. Meanwhile, HOA Karen began trying to defend herself publicly. At HOA meetings, she presented documents and claims that her actions had been approved, portraying herself as the hero attempting to protect the lake. Some residents were initially confused, not knowing who to trust. But the homeowner had the advantage of thorough, meticulous records. He remained calm during these meetings, listening to her statements, noting contradictions, quietly planning the next steps. Patience and careful observation had become his strongest tools in this conflict. As the investigation progressed, more neighbors came forward with information. Some admitted they had witnessed suspicious activities near the lake, but were afraid to speak up earlier. Others shared concerns about unexplained smells or sudden changes in wildlife behavior. The homeowner encouraged them to document everything, reassuring them that facts would carry more weight than emotions. Together, they built a timeline of events that clearly showed patterns of deliberate interference with the lake's natural state. The homeowner also noticed that Karen's influence was waning slightly. Some residents who had previously remained loyal or silent were starting to question her actions. The truth, backed by evidence and professional investigation, began to surface. Neighbors started discussing her behavior more openly, realizing that her claims of authority and care were misleading. They saw that the changes in the lake were not accidental, not natural, and certainly not beneficial, she had claimed. One afternoon, the homeowner received a call from the environmental inspectors. They informed him that their tests confirmed the presence of harmful chemicals in the water, substances not allowed in private lakes or communities. They praised the homeowner for his careful documentation, noting that without his records, it would have been difficult to link the damage to intentional actions. The homeowner felt a mixture of relief and renewed determination. The next steps were clear. The evidence had to be presented formally. Legal procedures needed to begin, and community members had to be informed in a factual, calm way. HOA Karen, however, did not give up easily. She began sending emails to residents, claiming that the homeowner and others were exaggerating the situation and spreading false rumors. Her tone was authoritative and manipulative, aiming to create doubt. But neighbors who had observed the lake, smelled the chemicals, and seen dead fish firsthand were not convinced. The homeowner encouraged them to respond carefully, focusing on facts, observations, and documentation rather than emotions or accusations. This approach gradually built credibility and countered her attempts at misinformation. With evidence and professional reports in hand, the homeowner attended another HOA meeting. This time, prepared to present facts clearly and calmly. He laid out the timeline, shared photos and videos, and explained the observations recorded over weeks. The room fell silent as neighbors saw the clear contrast between HOA Karen's claims and the documented reality. It became impossible to ignore the truth. Her actions had harmed the lake, the animals, and the community. And her attempts to control the narrative had failed. Legal advisors and inspectors began coordinating with the community, explaining the next steps. HOA Karen's denials and attempts to manipulate were no longer effective because the facts spoke louder than words. The homeowner realized that patience, careful observation, and methodical documentation had paid off. This was not just about personal vindication. It was about protecting the environment, the community, and ensuring that no one could cause harm without accountability. Neighbors began to support each other more openly. Private meetings and shared discussions turned into small planning sessions for restoration efforts. They coordinated cleaning the lake, removing harmful residues, and planting new vegetation to help the ecosystem recover. The homeowner led by example, showing that calm, determined, and informed action could make a real difference. Small victories, like the return of a few fish or the growth of plants, brought hope and motivation to the group as authorities formally addressed HOA Karen's actions. The homeowner observed the community slowly regaining trust and cohesion. The lake, though damaged, showed signs of recovery, and residents began spending more time outdoors again, noticing the birds, the sun reflecting on the water, and the quiet moments of peace that had always made the place special. HOA Karen's influence, once intimidating and pervasive, diminished as facts, evidence, and shared action overpowered manipulation. Throughout the process, the homeowner remained grounded in what he could control. While legal procedures continued and authorities dealt with HOA Karen, he focused on helping the lake and neighbors. He spent mornings walking along the shore, observing the water, noting improvements, gently guiding community efforts to protect and restore the ecosystem. Every small step felt significant: planting new grasses, feeding surviving wildlife, cleaning debris from the water's edge. Residents who had been fearful started to feel empowered. The homeowner encouraged careful observation, note-taking, and reporting, reinforcing the lesson that facts and patience are more powerful than fear or intimidation. Gradually, HOA Karen's attempts to dominate and manipulate lost their effect. The community learned that standing together, armed with evidence and calm determination, could overcome even aggressive and controlling behavior in quiet moments by the lake. The homeowner reflected on the journey. It had begun with small annoyances, escalating into harassment, and then turning into environmental harm. The challenge had tested patience, resilience, and strategic thinking. Yet by staying calm, focusing on facts, and working with neighbors, he had helped expose the truth and protect the community. The lake, scarred but recovering, symbolized the results of careful, persistent effort against unfair and dangerous actions. The process was far from over, but momentum had shifted. HOA Karen's denials were no longer convincing. Her influence diminished, and neighbors were increasingly united. The homeowner felt a sense of purpose and pride, knowing that calm, human-centered action could bring about justice and recovery. Together, they worked to heal the lake, restore wildlife, and strengthen trust within the community. Evenings spent by the lake became moments of reflection and hope. The sun would set, casting warm light over the water. Small signs of life, birds returning, fish swimming, plants regrowing, served as reminders of resilience. The homeowner understood that challenges like this could emerge anywhere, but patience, documentation, community support, and focus on truth could overcome even seemingly overwhelming obstacles. HOA. Karen's story was no longer hidden behind authority and manipulation. Her actions were documented, investigated, and understood by the community and the authorities. The homeowner had played a critical role, not through confrontation or anger, but through careful observation, strategic thinking, and human-centered actions that valued both truth and community welfare. The lake, still healing, reflected the journey, scars from past harm, but evidence of resilience, unity, and hope for the future. By the end of Part 4, the community began to rebuild trust and reclaim their space. HOA Karen's control had weakened, the environmental impact was being addressed, and the homeowner had established a new standard for vigilance and calm leadership. While the situation remained complex, and the legal outcomes were still unfolding, the truth had surfaced, the damage was documented, and a plan for recovery and unity had begun. For the first time in weeks, the homeowner could feel a sense of relief and confidence, knowing that patience, facts, and collaboration had prevailed, and that the lake and the neighborhood had a chance to heal and thrive once more. The final weeks of the ordeal were filled with a mix of relief, anxiety, and cautious optimism. The homeowner had seen the lake change, recover slightly, and then be threatened again. HOA Karen had tried to maintain control, sending emails, creating subtle conflicts, and claiming that she was protecting the community. But by now, the evidence and professional reports had made it impossible for anyone reasonable to ignore the damage she had caused. Legal proceedings were underway, and the community had rallied around the truth, preparing to ensure that justice was served and that similar events could never happen again. Residents began organizing restoration projects on the lake. The homeowner worked alongside neighbors to replant vegetation along the shore, introduce measures to improve water quality, and ensure that wildlife had safe spaces to return. They spent mornings clearing debris, removing traces of harmful chemicals, and carefully monitoring the plants and animals. Small victories emerged almost daily. A fish swam near the surface, a bird landed on the water, or new shoots appeared in previously damaged areas. These moments reminded everyone that persistence and care could overcome deliberate harm. The homeowner also met with legal representatives to understand the full scope of HOA Karen's consequences. She was facing fines, potential criminal charges, and the loss of authority within the HOA. The homeowner reflected on the importance of evidence and documentation, realizing that without careful records, the outcome might have been very different. The process had tested patience, courage, and resilience, but it had also shown that careful, calm action could lead to justice. Despite the ongoing legal matters, daily life in the neighborhood slowly returned to normal. Children played near the lake again, neighbors greeted each other warmly, and the homeowner found moments of peace during morning walks and quiet evenings. The community, once divided and anxious, began to rebuild trust. People realized that their collective vigilance and support has been critical in exposing wrongdoing and protecting the environment. This sense of unity strengthened relationships and reminded everyone that small acts of care and observation could have a profound impact. HOA Karen's attempts to manipulate the narrative failed as residents shared their experiences openly. Emails, conversations, and meetings documented the truth, leaving no room for false claims. Her influence within the community diminished significantly. Those who had previously been intimidated felt empowered to speak and act responsibly. The homeowner observed these changes with satisfaction, knowing that the careful approach had worked and that fear no longer dictated the community's actions. Over time, the lake began to flourish once again. The water cleared, fish populations stabilized, and plants grew back along the shore. The homeowner took special care to monitor every change, recording progress and noting any threats. While recovery would take time, the sense of achievement was undeniable. The lake, which had once been a battleground for control and revenge, was now a symbol of resilience, cooperation, and the power of persistence. Nature itself seemed to reflect the community's efforts, showing signs of healing and renewal.